We're back to domestic affairs with URC returning this weekend. My name is Mark. Let's talk rugby. Six Nations is done and dusted, and what an end we had to that competition. And now we are back to the URC. There are only 6 games left now in the regular season. Those are going to fly by. And that means every win from now on so important in terms of either jockeying for position at the top of the table or trying to get yourself into those playoff places. So everybody has a lot to play for this round and in the coming rounds as well. But something to cover before we jump into the fixtures is last weekend we had 3 fixtures that were played. Two of them related to the cancellations for the Storm at the beginning of the year, and then one South African one as well. It means that everyone is now on the same number of games played. So Connacht 31, Scarlets 14, Connacht moving up to 9th place on the back of that. Edinburgh 19, Ulster 40, Ulster moving up to 3rd place on the back of that, and then Vodacom Bulls 19, DHL Stormers 32, and DHL Stormers moving up to 2nd place because of that, so getting themselves back on track there. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's talk about the games that are on this weekend. And we have a nice spread over the weekend. We've got 3 games on Friday, 4 on Saturday, and we even got a Sunday game. And wouldn't you know, it's the one weekend where I have to work, so I'm not going to be able to cover a lot of the games. I'm looking at them. There'll be one on Friday, probably the big game on Saturday, and the Sunday game, unfortunately, is going to be while I'm working, so I'll probably only get to cover 2 games in full over the weekend, but we will do our usual wrap up on Monday or Tuesday. So let's get into the games that we do have this weekend. So Friday is 3 games, first of which is Vodacom Bulls versus Cardiff Rugby at the Loftus Versfeld, and this is the Bulls in 8th versus Cardiff in 5th. So the Bulls at the moment 10 points behind Cardiff. If they could get, let's say, a bonus point win here without Cardiff scoring any points, they could cut that deficit in half, and that would go a long way to the Bulls kind of, getting back up to where we're used to seeing them in the table, more towards that kind of top 4 or 5 rather than just about scraping into the playoffs as they are at the minute. But Bulls have had a bit of a mini revival recently. That kind of, a little stutter in that, though, losing to the Stormers at home, and Cardiff have been up and down in the last while, and we see that in their last 7. So the Bulls have won 3 of their last 7, and Cardiff won 4 of their last 7. But the Bulls have won 3 of the last 4, and Cardiff only won 2 of the last 4. So the Bulls, in their sequence, they lost to the Lions, then the Sharks, then they lost to the Stormers, then on a 3-game winning streak against, first of all, Edinburgh, then the Lions, and then the Sharks, but then that lost last weekend to the Stormers. Cardiff then win against Zebre, followed by a loss against Scarlets, win against Dragons, followed by a loss against Ospreys, win against Benetton, followed by a loss against Ulster, and then last time out then that win against Leinster, and that really was a brilliant performance from them. And now, they're going down to South Africa, and they really do want to keep that momentum going. Realistically, probably looking at trying to get, just something out of the game, losing bonus point, try bonus point, something, just keep those points ticking so that they don't fall into the grasp of, those teams from 7th and below at the minute. And then, as I said, the Bulls, they're looking to drastically cut that gap between themselves and Cardiff and really start moving up that table in these last 6 games. So we've seen the Bulls being able to put runs together previously. Cardiff, we've seen them last year starting the season really well and they're falling away. And yeah, this feels like a pivotal one for both these teams. I'm not talking about Cardiff necessarily winning the game, but you do still have to get something out of it. Just keep those points ticking, and could be the difference between coming back from South Africa still in that top 6 or somewhere further down the table. So what do I think about what's going to go on here? Well, I think the Bulls at home, I'm wearing the jersey and I'm not brave enough to back against them at home against a Cardiff team who have been up and down. And if you look at that, last 7 Cardiff, win, loss, win, loss, win, loss, win. Well, the next in the sequence is a loss, and that's what I'm predicting. I'm going to go for a Bulls win in that one, but I do hope that Cardiff at least gets something out of the game. On to the next one then, another Friday kickoff. Oh, sorry, that one is a 6 p.m. kickoff, by the way. Although I have a feeling these are showing my local times in Spain. So they may be an hour earlier if you're watching in the UK, Ireland, the UK. And then always check your local listings though for times. Next then we have Scarlets versus Zebre Parma is an 8:45 kickoff here. So the normal kickoff for Friday night games is 7:45. So imagine that's what it is in Ireland and the UK. This one is in Parky Scarlets. And yeah, you've got Scarlets, who, again, another Welsh team who had a bit of a mini revival, kind of on the way down at the minute, and Zebre, who just can't buy a win at the minute. They're on a 7-game losing streak, whereas Scarlets have won 2 of their last 7 and drawn 1 as well. And this is 15th versus 16th, and Zebre, if they could somehow find a way to win, could potentially leapfrog Scarlets and move off the bottom of the table. But recent form, performances haven't been terrible, but still they're not getting over the line. They're not getting those results, and that kind of maybe points towards that they're probably not going to be able to do it here either. If maybe the fixture was reversed with Zebre at home, you might think that they might be able to actually get something out of it. But if we look at the sequence, so Scarlets, they beat Cardiff, then losses against Ospreys and Dragons, then a win against Munster, then a draw against Benetton, and then losses against Edinburgh, followed by Connacht, whereas Zebre, as I said, lost 7 in a row. So Cardiff, then Benetton, Benetton again, Glasgow again, Connacht, and then Munster. And obviously that losing streak stretches back a bit further because Zebre have played 12 games. They've won the first 2 games of the season and they've lost the next 10 on the bounce. So what started as a hugely promising season for them has kind of gone back to the way it normally is for Zebre. But we have to remember as well, though, Zebre getting 2 wins of the season. If you'd gone back, a few years ago, you wouldn't have thought that would happen to them. So the thing now is, can they make that 3-4 wins in the season? I thought certainly at the start of the season, maybe they're going to be in that mix. Not necessarily to actually make the playoffs, but certainly in that mix of teams who are close enough towards the end to, if they went on a run, to get into the playoffs. I think all of that is gone now. Now it's about what can they do to give themselves some kind of base for next year to build on. This will be one opportunity just in terms of how close the teams are on the table for them. But I feel like, yes, Scarlets, have been looking good recently in terms of the way they've been playing. We always know the Scarlets can play some really good rugby, but they've been able to, the performance of the pack on top of that has gotten them those couple of wins and a draw there, and a couple of close results as well. Whereas again, Zebre, they've not really shown all that much in terms of especially away from home, being able to go away from home and get a result. So I'm going to go for a Scarlets win in that one. And then we're on to the third of the Friday night games, and this is an Irish derby, so it's Ulster versus Connacht. Here in Spain, it's 8:45 kickoff, but for those of you in Ireland or the UK, it'll be 7:45, and it is at the Affidea Stadium, so basically Ravenhill up in Belfast. So of these two teams, Ulster have won 4 of the last 7. Connacht have only won 3 of the last 7, but by contrast to Ulster, Connacht have won the last 3 on the bounce, and Ulster have been kind of up and down a little bit, wins and losses. So Ulster's sequence, they've had a loss against Leinster, then wins against Connacht and Munster, then they lost to Scarlets, they beat Cardiff, they lost to Ospreys, and then they beat Edinburgh, whereas Connacht have lost to the Dragons, then Munster, then Leinster again, then they beat Zebre, Glasgow and Scarlets. So a nice run for Connacht there. It's still, more than 2 years since they've won an Interpro game. And Interpro, for those of you outside of Ireland, means a game against another Irish province, so be it Ulster, Munster or Leinster. So going back more than 2 years, I think it was January 2024 was the last time they beat someone, and they beat Munster in that one. So to go up to Belfast to an Ulster team that has really been on a high this season and produced a brilliant performance last week as well. So a lot of those Ulster players won't be, let's say, rusty compared to other teams that Connacht could have faced, because Connacht also played last weekend, having that game under the belt against somebody else, one of the, 10 teams that hadn't played last weekend, they may have had a bit of an edge, but also had a game last weekend, and, both teams probably not going to have too many of their Six Nations stars back. Well, Connacht didn't have all that many players in the Six Nations this year, but those that were in the squad, etc., may not feature in this game. So you're looking at the wider squad here, and I gotta say, I'm gonna back Ulster for the win in that one. Next time we're on to the Saturday games. So the first is the Lions versus Edinburgh. And this one is the Lions at the moment in 7th place, so they're in the playoffs. Edinburgh down in 12th place, and you feel like at this point Edinburgh, like they're 10 points behind the Lions. They're 7 points off the playoffs. The Bulls there with 30 points, Edinburgh with 23. So I feel like they've got to get something going now if they're really going to have any chance of making those playoffs. And that's the same for any team kind of down around the area. You're looking at the Sharks as well, Benetton, and possibly the Dragons as well down there. But the Lions certainly in the better form of the two teams. They've won 4 of the last 7, 1 draw and just 2 losses, where Edinburgh have only won 2 of their last 7. And the Lions in their sequence, they beat the Bulls, then they lost against the Stormers, then they beat the Sharks, drew against the Ospreys, they lost to the Bulls, then they beat the Sharks, and they beat the Stormers. So some very good performances from the Lions in there, and a lot of the good performances have come in South Africa as well. Obviously most of them at home, but some of them at other South African teams as well. Edinburgh, their sequence, lost against Glasgow again, then they beat Benetton, lost to the Bulls, they lost to Leinster, they beat the Scarlets, and then they lost to Ulster, and that was last weekend. So the fact that they had a game and the Lions didn't might help them a little bit, but the Lions have played over this period as well, just not last weekend. So may not again be a massive advantage to Edinburgh. And it's a weird one. You look at the form and you think, yeah, Lions are definitely going to win this one because they're at home and they've been playing so well at home, and that's where that resurgence for them, getting themselves back up to 7th in the table has come from. But Edinburgh, they're so unpredictable, so up and down. This is the kind of game that they might actually produce a result in, but I can't just go with their kind of wacky unpredictability, so I'm going to go for a Lions win in that one. Next time we have Hollywoodbets Sharks versus Munster, and this one is a 4 o'clock kickoff here, so 3 o'clock in the UK, and it's at the Hollywoodbets Kings Park. The previous one, actually, Lions versus Edinburgh, is 12:45 kickoff UK and Ireland time, 1:45 here in Spain. Okay, so the Sharks versus Munster. So neither team in brilliant form. Both won 3 of their last 7. Munster obviously higher in the table at the moment, up in 6th, and the Sharks down in 11th. And the Sharks, they've lost their last 2 on the bounce, and Munster are on the back of a win. But this is kind of a tough one to call. It's a repeat of the what was a quarterfinal last year, right? And the whole histrionics with the wink and the penalties, etc. Certainly was fun. So there certainly will be some. How would you say, some beef between the teams, I think, in this one. But the Sharks in their sequence, they lost to Connacht, then they beat the Bulls, they lost to the Lions, then wins against the Stormers, 2 wins on the bounce against the Stormers, then they lose against the Lions, and then they lose against the Bulls again. So they've been losing, as I said, more than they've been winning recently, and most of those games have been in South Africa, which will certainly help in terms of not being fatigued from travel. Munster then, their sequence lost against the Stormers, and that's kind of when Munster were up there like second in the table, only to the Stormers. Then they beat the Ospreys, they lose against Leinster, then Ulster, then they beat the Dragons, they lose against Glasgow, and then they beat Zebre. So, you look at the teams they've beaten, Ospreys, Dragons, and Zebre, like, none of those teams in the top half of the table. Neither are the Sharks. But we know if the Sharks turn on, they certainly can give Munster a bit of a pasting. But I'm going to go stick my neck out here and go for a Munster win in this one. It's just a feeling I have, and I'm actually going to, rather than going with the Edinburgh feeling, I'm going to go with the Munster feeling this time. Okay, next game then is Benetton versus Ospreys, and it's also on at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock here in Spain, and it's at the Stadio Monigo, and obviously over in Treviso. And this is, you feel like this is not quite a knockout game, but the loser will find it difficult to kind of get that momentum to get themselves into the playoffs. At the moment, Ospreys in 10th, so a defeat wouldn't hurt them as much. They're just 1 point behind the Bulls at the minute, as it would with Benetton. But you certainly think, if Benetton lost this one, then it's going to be really hard they're going to have to go on some run, I think, to get themselves back up into the playoff reckoning. But, both teams well, Ospreys certainly in better form. Benetton not in terrible form. They've won 2 of the last 7, drawn 2 of those as well, and lost 3. Whereas Ospreys have won 4 of the last 7, drawn 1 and lost 2. So Benetton in that sequence then lost against Ulster, then wins against Zebre back-to-back. Then they lost against Edinburgh and Cardiff, and then draws against Scarlets and the Dragons. So they've had 2 draws on the bounce against Welsh opposition. Ospreys then lost against Edinburgh, lost against Munster, then wins against the Scarlets and Cardiff, then a draw against the Lions, wins against the Dragons, and then Ulster. So that Ulster performance was really good. Ulster were flying high at the time. So this is a weird one. I almost feel like, that it could be another draw on the third draw on the bounce for Benetton against Welsh opposition. But I always say on this channel, I don't like predicting draws. I'm not going to do it in this one either. I'm going to go for Benetton to just scrape the win. But I have a feeling Ospreys might get 1 or 2 bonus points out of this game as well. Okay, on to then the main event, for me at least, of the weekend. And this one is a 5:30 kickoff, 6:30 here in Spain. So it's just about as my workday finishes. So I'll actually be able to watch the game. Although I'll probably be a bit frazzled just trying to jump on just in time and then make my notes for a review as well. But Glasgow versus Leinster at Scotstoun Stadium. And this feels like a really big game because you've got Glasgow, top of the league. Leinster have, recovered to be up there in the top 4 at least, but they are on the back of a loss, having had a long sequence of wins, and so are Glasgow as well. So Glasgow have won 5 of the last 7, Leinster 6 of the last 7, and in terms of sequence, Glasgow had won 5 in a row in those 7, and Leinster 6 in a row. So Glasgow lost to Scarlets, and then those 5 wins were Edinburgh, then Edinburgh again, Zebre again, and then Munster, and then that lost was against Connacht. Leinster in their sequence, so 6 wins on the bounce. So Dragons, Ulster, Munster, Connacht, Edinburgh, and then that loss against Cardiff by a point. And a really good win for Cardiff in that one, but very poor from Leinster. So, and again, I can't see too many or any of their Six Nations players being available for this game either. They still will have a strong team, but we've seen this year that even though that team that in previous years has basically been the backbone of Leinster's performance in the regular season in the URC and has, season after season delivered really good results and had them up there at the top of the table or top 2 in the table, without having to rely too much on those, current Irish internationals. It's not really happened for them this year. They've kind of been scraping by with wins, and a lot of the time these guys as well, when the pressure is on, haven't really been performing all that well. And you've got to think that again, both teams going to be without probably a lot of Six Nations players, but I would say that in terms of the wider squads of these 2 teams, I think Glasgow's wider squad has actually performed better than Leinster's, and that's one of the big reasons why they are top of the league. We're seeing a lot of fringe players stepping up, ones that have been there maybe for a long time, that aren't really in consideration for Scotland anymore, or who weren't Scotland qualified anyway. And we're seeing a good injection of younger players as well, coming in, taking their chances and really performing there as well. So really good mix there to have, when the big boys are away, as it were, and kind of very akin to what Leinster have had in previous years. Leinster, for whatever reason, those players have not been performing like they had so many weeks to prepare for that Cardiff game, and they went out and the performance, was honestly unacceptable from a Leinster side. You would expect some kind of reaction to that, but again, Glasgow are coming in on the back of a loss as well, so they'll be prepared. They'll have prepared for this, and even at the start of the season, this game would have been circled as a massive game for Glasgow. And now they find themselves top of the table. They know if they beat Leinster, they're going to make it really difficult at least for Leinster to catch them up, because even if Glasgow don't get a bonus point, they're more than likely going to stretch that lead from 4 points to 8 points, and with only 5 regular games left, that's a lot for Leinster to catch up, and it would mean Glasgow basically imploding in those last 5 games. So and because of that, then you look at it from the Leinster side of things, you think it's a big game for Leinster as well, because they're 4th in the table at the moment. They've got Cardiff and Munster breathing down their necks, both within 2 points of them. They've got the Stormers and Ulster on the same points as them, but both having better points difference than them. And obviously then they've got Glasgow 4 points ahead of them on the top of the table. So a loss here could be could basically leave Leinster kind of scrambling to try and get back into that top 3 or 4 by the end of the season, rather than aiming for the top 1 or 2. So I think this is going to be an absolutely epic game between these two, and my head is saying Glasgow are home, Glasgow are going to win, and my heart is saying Leinster again are probably going to produce a performance in this one. And I'm finding it massively difficult to predict who is actually going to win this one. And it feels like just a coin toss. But I'm going to go with my heart in this one, and I'm going to back Leinster to just about scrape the win, and then put the cap among the pigeons in terms of, potentially you're going to have 3 or 4 teams up there at the top of the table within no points or 1 or 2 points of each other, and it's going to be a mad scramble then in the last 5 games. Okay, and then on to the final game of the weekend, and that's a Sunday game. It's DHL Stormers versus the Dragons RFC. This is a 2 o'clock kickoff. Again, that's Spain time, so local time, look up your listings. But for Ireland UK, it is a 1 o'clock kickoff, and it is at the DHL Stadium. And this one, again, maybe reverse it. If you had Dragons at home, I think Dragons could potentially feel like they've got a chance to cause some kind of upset, but away in South Africa, I think it's a different story. But the Stormers at the minute, they're climbed back up to 2nd place. Dragons are in 14th. So, in terms of the teams who are playing each other this weekend, it's the biggest gap between any 2 teams in the table. The Stormers have won 4 of the last 7. Dragons have won 2 of their last 7 with a draw in there as well. The Stormers, they had wins against Munster, then the Lions and the Bulls, then 3 losses on the bounce against the Sharks again, and then the Lions, and then last again, then they beat the Bulls. The Dragons, their sequence, they lost against Leinster, then they beat Connacht, lost against Cardiff, they beat Scarlets, then they lost against Munster, lost against Ospreys, and then had that draw against Benetton. So, if they get a draw at this, I think they'd be absolutely delighted. But I think it's probably going to be another defeat for the Dragons. Yeah, and I think Stormers, it feels like, that win against the Bulls, and if they get another win in this one, it really will feel like they've got their mojo back just in time for the run-in, towards the playoffs. And as usual, then they're going to be a really hard team to beat once they get into those knockout stages. But those are predictions for the weekend. Again, some massive matchups in terms of determining positions, all the way through the table. So it should be a really exciting weekend of rugby.